Luton is a town some 34 miles outside of London, famous for its airport, and for that one time it was in an episode of Space 1999. But did you know that at one time it might have been on the London Underground? It all started in 1919 when Frank Pick produced a report on the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway. The CCEHR, also known as the Hampstead Tube, was an underground line owned by Underground Electric Railways of London, of which Frank Pick was commercial manager. The CCEHR would eventually become part of the Northern Line, but at this point it was a semi-independent entity. The approach that had been taken when building it was a fairly risky, speculative one. Its northern terminus was at Golders Green, which at the time of construction was basically out in the middle of nowhere, but which was quickly growing into a true suburb of London. The line proved to be a mixed success, but that didn't stop the company from looking ahead to the future and further extensions. Some suggestions put forward on Pick's report included lines to Alexandra Palace, High Barnet, Edgware and Hendon. It seems likely that these were intended to compete directly with the Great Northern Railway, which ran trains to High Barnet, Edgware and Ali Pali. Neither the High Barnet nor the Alexandra Palace lines were built, but it's the extension to Hendon that's particularly interesting here. The CCEHR had indirectly served Hendon since 1912. They laid on buses from Golders Green for visitors to the spectacular air shows that were staged at the aerodrome there. It was not unreasonable to assume that an extension to Hendon would pay its way. Hendon also had a main line station owned by the Midland Railway, and that was what led to another of Pick's ideas. The Midland Railway's line ran from London to Bedford, then all the way up to Carlisle. The London terminus was at St Pancras, and of course the railway is still there after several changes of ownership. What Frank Pick proposed was that the CCEHR should directly connect with the Midland line at Hendon, then from there use the Midlands line to get to Harpenden. Harpenden is and was a commuter town, so again it wasn't unreasonable to assume that there was traffic there. And unlike the other proposed extensions, there would be no major engineering challenges. No tunnels to be dug, no hills to be climbed. The only physical obstacle was the fact that the Midland Railway was a steam-hauled line, and would need to be electrified. In many ways it wasn't dissimilar to what was already happening on the Bakerloo line, which ran over the London and North Western Railway's tracks to Watford Junction. It would be a fast service, only stopping at a few stations. Underground Electric Railways of London, or UERL, owned a number of bus operators as well as underground lines. So the idea was that they would serve destinations that the train didn't stop at by bus from the stations it did stop at. But at this point it was simply a proposal. Just a proposal. In 1921, the company sought funding to extend to Edgware. Now, this line was a bit of an oddity. It had been put forward by a company called the Edgware and Hampstead Railway in 1902, but the Edgware and Hampstead couldn't get the money together to build it. They kept renewing the right to build the line, but didn't construct an inch of track. In 1903, UERL took the company over, and continued renewing the right to build the line. In 1921, the government were looking to invest in job creation schemes, so UERL came forward and said, "Hang on, lads, remember that line to Edgware we're always banging on about?" So now they had the money, and they dusted off Pick's 1919 proposal to see where they could go from there, literally and figuratively. They decided that Harpenden was great, honestly really fantastic, but what if they took things further? What if they went all the way up to Luton? This plan was drawn up in more detail. There would be stops at Mill Hill, Elstree, Radlett, Knapsbury, St Albans and Chiltern Green before the terminus at Luton. Oddly enough, Harpenden doesn't seem to have been a stop. The big problem with the line was technical. This would be a long route requiring a lot of fast running, whereas the CCEHR had been built as a tube line. The trains were built for relatively slow running with frequent stops. For the Luton extension, they'd need to be faster, they'd need more luggage space, and, it was generally assumed, they'd need first-class accommodation. all of which were fairly alien concepts on the tube, although the Metropolitan Railway at this time did have first-class accommodation and even Pullman carriages, but that's another story. It was also believed that people wouldn't tolerate longitudinal seating for long distances, so most of the seating would need to be transverse. In the end, while it was a fun idea, UERL didn't think it was worth pursuing. They were already working on combining the CCEHR with another of their acquisitions, the City and South London Railway. So it made more sense to concentrate on that than get involved in what amounted to a totally different kind of railway that would require a significant investment and was outside of their area of expertise. Oddly enough, though, while the CCEHR didn't get their line from Hendon to Luton, I think the scheme does have a spiritual successor. These days, Thameslink runs from Bedford right down into central London and beyond, providing a frequent service of electric trains aimed at commuters. I think we could argue that Frank Pick had the right idea, just at the wrong time. Well, I hope you enjoyed this long-distance tale from the tube. If you did, then please do click the like button and perhaps consider subscribing for more about the Underground and related topics. Hopefully ones that don't require me to say pick and proposal in frequent succession so often. Thanks as ever to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the electrification to my Midland main line. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.